Hello and welcome to Forbes India CFO Dialogues virtual discussion in partnership with the Institute of Management Accountants, IMA. At the outset, from all of us at Forbes India, let me begin by thanking you all for taking time out to be with us, despite your busy schedule. To our audience who've joined us today, it has been an incredibly hard few months, and we can only hope that life has since returned to normalcy for you. We hope you and your loved ones continue to stay safe and fine. We joined this afternoon by some stalwarts of the IT industry and the manufacturing world. We have Mr. Tarun Satiya, Managing Director, Strategy and Consulting, CFO and Enterprise Value, Accenture India. Tejaswini Rajwade, the CFO, IBM India, South Asia. Manish Dugar, the CFO, Mphasis. Daniel Spindler, CFO, Siemens Limited. And Doreen Remmen, CFO, IMA. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us today. Saying these are unreal times would be an understatement. As we at Forbes India wrote some time ago in our anniversary edition, this is a disruption where a fundamental idea of the world that we have known has changed. There's now a before COVID era and an after COVID era. For the business world in particular, the ongoing pandemic clearly halted business activity overnight, disrupting supply chains and sales, creating an instant liquidity crisis for businesses big and small. The pandemic has punched holes in our development and growth model, showcasing how quickly a crisis can unravel, transform from a health emergency to an economic, financial, and humanitarian crisis. Before last year, it was primarily financial events that led to systemic crisis in markets across the globe. All that means it's time for a relook at environment and sustainability. While emphasizing the importance of resilience, COVID-19 also provides us with a rare opportunity to pause and reimagine how we might do things differently going forward. Companies that integrated sustainability and transparency strategically into their business operations prior to COVID-19 were much more agile in responding to unexpected events. As CFOs, you're all well placed to lead the response to COVID-19 and create long-term opportunities in helping push towards a more sustainable future. Much of that, of course, is because you control the purse strings. On that note, let me begin by asking all of you about your learning from the past 2 years and were you really prepared for what followed in the last 2 years. Maybe we can start with Tarun and then we'll move around to the others.
Yeah, Manu, I guess an honest answer would be I think none of us were prepared for this about a year back. It was really a jolt out of the blue for many organizations, and it was really tough in terms of the sheer impact on human lives, society, businesses, etc. But I think what really is heartening is the way our society, our communities, our nations, and our businesses showed resilience and managed to come back to whatever extent they could, helping each other, helping their societies, communities, supply chains, customers, employees, etc. I think it has been a great learning experience, and there are definitely some very important lessons learned for future. And the good part is, I think it's no longer about profitability of businesses, but also the people and the planet. The other two P's of this entire ecosystem have become very, very important. And I think that's where we will see more and more progressive organizations focused on how do we establish the right balance across profitability, people, and planet. And I think that's what will look forward to true value creation on a sustainable and a long-term basis.
Absolutely. Tejaswini, your thoughts? I'm so sorry. I think you're on mute. Right. We'll just come back to Tejaswini in just a bit. Manish, maybe you can just start with the opening comments, and then we'll circle back to Tejaswini soon.
Sure. The least that I could think about is, the changes that this whole pandemic brought about, right? Uh, Other than the fact that we are now trying to get used to a different way of working, it's also a different environment, and it has impacted different, stakeholders, different people in the economy, in the country, in the industry differently. And on one side, I represent IT services, which probably has not got affected so much. If at all, there has been an acknowledgement that technology is part of everything, and hence we are seeing amazing demand, and we are helping all our partners in transforming, changing to adopt to the new environment. At the same time, it also adds to the responsibility of how do we kind of take the ecosystem along. At least from our perspective, we have seen that willingness to not just look at what can be done in the short term, but what can be done in the long term, building partnerships, looking at stakeholders as part of your own ecosystem rather than you individually yourself. I think that has played well for us over the last 15 months particularly, and even so from before. We have seen continuous support from all our customers. We have tried to support our employees, our vendors, our so to speak, partners in when we do the delivery to our customers, and all of that has added to you know I would say a win-win kind of an expectation, win-win kind of a situation. And I think that augurs very well for the ecosystem. It's interesting and it's surprising to see that it's not just one company, one industry, but the whole ecosystem is coming together to, to kind of, drive in that direction. ESG is something that was always an important thing. It has taken even more importance. And uh, I kind of completely agree with the sentiment and the philosophy that um, you know we can go much further if we walk together, and that's what is being demonstrated. I, however, don't necessarily believe that this has to be at the cost of profitability or at the cost of business. I think this in fact improves your sustainability, and hence your enterprise value. So I would think that humanity in total has responded to this in a very surprising and interesting way. I don't think if we were to put ourselves back in time, we would have expected this kind of a response, assuming something like this will happen. And I'm pretty sure that it is yet to finish. We have wave two in India, and there are conversations about more waves coming in. All I can tell you is that we are much better prepared, and hopefully we will have a lot of new things, new ways of doing things. We will probably get back to normalcy, but it will never be what it was before the pandemic hit us, and in a good way, I would say.
Okay, fascinating thoughts. Daniel, would you like to give us your thoughts, your opening comments on how the situation sort of unfolded for you, and were you really prepared for what happened?
So thank you very much, Manu. Hello, everybody here from Mumbai. I hope you're all healthy and safe. Manu, you were asking how were the last 2 years, and I guess it is not an understatement to say they were quite turbulent. I was actually exactly 2 years ago coming to India. I was looking forward, after having been in Singapore for some time, to come into a very large market, a very growing market with a very strong local footprint. And I was happy for the first half year that I was able also to travel around in the country to meet a lot of people, to get to know our business, to get to know our markets. But then suddenly from one day to the other, basically, the pandemic hit us, and it hit us all very hard. And I guess nobody would have ever thought what will happen in the next 1.5 years. So I was wondering when I was going to the office, commuting in the morning or especially in the evening, and said, wow, this is really heavy traffic. And then from the one day to the other, suddenly working from home. So now I'm sitting at my place here in Mumbai, being at home, and I don't meet any colleague anymore in person. We are all working remotely. We are all working now on a virtual mode. Also, new people have joined our organization who were completely virtually onboarded. Unthinkable in the past, and a lot of unthinkable things have happened in the last 1.5 years. So we were always, our philosophy was to drive profitable growth. And then suddenly we were confronted with a situation of a kind of a huge crisis. And then you not anymore think about how you grow, you think about how you can continue your business. as such, business continuity plans. You think about suddenly how to right-size your organization to cope with the pandemic. And now, I would say 1.5 years later, I think we have navigated quite well through this pandemic crisis. Of course, the second wave hit us all very hard, but I guess we were also better prepared than a year ago. So overall conclusion is we have made a lot of learnings out of that last 1.5 years, and things have changed dramatically. And that will also mean for us a transformation of our business. Maybe we'll talk about this later on. But the whole circumstances that we're in now is a different world. And I'm kind of looking forward to some normalcy, however that will look like. And especially I'm looking forward to see my colleagues again in person and to drive the business, meet with customers, meet with partners, again, also in a personal mode.
Absolutely. Doreen, from a global perspective, you think, just the line of thinking has changed drastically since, the pandemic unfolded?
Oh, I think so. Yes. Daniel talked about how well his company has navigated this, and many companies have done very well, including IMA. We proved how resilient we are. We had the technology in place and the culture in place to be able to move to remote work without dropping any balls. But of course, that technology was in place for other purposes. We had no idea that this was what we were going to need it for. I think that COVID-19 was a wake-up call to all businesses around the world, large and small. We learned how totally interconnected we all are. Manish talked about the ecosystem, the whole ecosystem with the supply chain and customers connected with our companies in the middle. We have recalibrated everything, and people are paying more attention to what is truly important to them. People and companies are now, I think, more sensitive to the health of the planet and the health of all its people. There is increased awareness and momentum that is driving meaningful change. So yes, I think this has driven change all around the world.
Tejaswini, let me come back to you now. Tarun and everybody else sort of spoke about this, about the importance of finding the balance between, people, planet, and profitability. Is that the same case with you also over the past 2 years now? I think we might have a problem with your audio again.
You might like to try by removing your earpiece.
Do you want to try to, yeah. There seems to be some problem from her end. So we'll come back to her in just a bit. I think the backend team will sort of try to figure that out. But let me go back to Tarun here. And Tarun, my question to you here is, has COVID-19 sort of driven home the urgency of a sustainable change at business? I mean, is that how business leaders are thinking of it right now? Sorry, Tarun, I think you're on. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. See, this has been a topic where we had a lot of chatter in business community, and not recently. I think last decade or so, ever since we had the financial crisis of 2008 and all.
Right.
ESG, sustainability, climate change, social responsibility, etc., have been important topics of discussion amongst business leaders, among investors, etc. And I think it's not very unnatural for business, because we have seen many businesses survive for more than 100 plus years, which means that they must be having or must be following certain practices, certain protocols, which made them sustainable for more than centuries. And it's not one, two, I can count hundreds of businesses which have sustained themselves for so long. I think what really has happened is that I think the investor groups have started becoming very, very vocal about it. and I think and it's again backed by a lot of research where investors have seen that organizations which have high scores on ESG parameters tend to give better results, have better customer engagements, have better market share. Their financial parameters are always better, and the market pays premium for these businesses. And again, I think even when I did hear Manish talk about the ecosystem and the importance of nurturing that ecosystem. I think our consumers or customers, our employees, and other social stakeholders are very critical. And I think that's where, and especially in the generation of millennials, I think the reputation of a business, the brand of a business is a very, very important aspect, especially when you are looking at attracting best of the talent. And if you are not seen as a sustainable business, as a trustworthy business, or business which has good practices around sustainability, around environment, around social, etc., it's very difficult for you to attract talent. And same goes with consumer. And we have consumers or customers lose trust in your business, it's very, very difficult to survive for any business. And especially in the new age of where we have a lot of these cancel cultures through social media, etc., it becomes even more pertinent for business to be very, very conscious and focus about it. So I guess the point is, I think it was always an underlying theme in many good progressive organizations. I think what has really brought it to the surface is obviously the jolt of COVID-19. I think this has forced everybody in the ecosystem, be it investors, be it businesses, be it employees, be it consumers, to see from businesses from a long-term perspective, sustainable, and whether businesses will be able to create long-term value, making sure that people are healthy, society is not impacted in a negative manner, and we're not doing any irreversible damage to the climate. So I think some of this chatter has really become very prominent, and rightly so, because I think studies after studies have shown that businesses which are doing very well on ESG parameters tend to have lowest cost of capital, will demonstrate at least 250 to 300 basis point better EBITDA margins, will have higher market share. So if these are the characteristics, if I have to go back, it only makes sense to focus on this right away.
Absolutely. Daniel, would you agree with that? I mean, Tarun spoke about the importance, of consumers, customers, millennials, spoke about the culture. Putting all of this together, and do you reckon that COVID-19 has actually accelerated an urgency towards sustainable change in business?
No, certainly. I mean, I agree to everything what Tarun already mentioned. I think we all had a range of experiences in various phases of the pandemic. And never before disruption has more clearly shown that there's a change towards some more sustainable thinking. And if I just start with sustainability, Tarun mentioned already, it's about environment, it's about the E, it's about protecting our environment. And the pandemic has found its origin in nature, and we need to protect our environment, nature and wild animals. So saving the environment for the next generations is very important, and all companies are playing a major role in this. So for instance, we are supporting our customers on environmentally friendly production and solution offerings. On our own agenda, we have CO2 reduction. So we committed over the last 5 to 6 years to reduce our CO2 emissions by 50%. We want to be climate neutral by 2030. So we have very ambitious goals on protecting our environment. And also when it comes to other questions regarding sustainability, the very same thing. So generally, I think sustainability requires a very long-term view, and we have to be serious about our future. And just if I might quote our company founder, Werner von Siemens, one of his most famous quotes was here, "I'm not selling a business for a short-term profit." So this has already shown 170 years ago or so that sustainability is important. And COVID has now very clearly proven that competitive advantages of business stand and falls with the ability to respond and to adapt constructively to rapid and fast and unforeseen changes and disruptions. However, I believe that innovation and technology should still be purpose-driven, I would put it under the term of business to society, because in the end, it's also about our long-term view of our company. So it's about also now new business models. It's about what I already in my introduction said. It's about transforming the business towards a more sustainable business. We have been traditionally very strong in automation and on the energy side. Now it's about transforming into a more digital age. Industry 4.0, for instance, to mention. And that requires also new business models. And I think this is also where the CFOs are very much needed to implement new business models to be explored on the back of digitalization mostly, but also on liquidity challenges. I think COVID also has shown that there are liquidity shortages in the market. And when it comes, for instance, to financing business, which is also a very stronghold of ourselves, then also our financing solutions need to adapt to this new reality. And maybe also to touch one more angle, which is the supply chains. I think also COVID has very much shown how important it is to have intact supply chains. We are part also of a global supply chain. We have many factories here in India. We have warehouses, we have logistics centers, we have hundreds of project sites. And we need to make sure that we are also getting the right materials, that we are getting the right resources. And we have seen a huge shortage, especially on raw materials. Commodity pricing is now increasing. I think that is also a big worry for all of us in this round. How do we deal with this? And then I would say operationally, a company also needs to act long term. It's about liquidity planning. You said it, Manu, in your introduction. It's about having the liquidity available also to go through a crisis, which I also think is a prerequisite to be sustainable. And then finally, let me conclude also with the S piece of ESG. The social one is about the people. Our priority was always the well-being of employees. And I think Tarun already said it before, you need to have committed people, you have to have motivated people to go successfully also through a crisis. And there already it pays very much off to have a sustainable business model and to be very respectful also towards your workforce. So for us, it was always important from the beginning that we assure the jobs, that nobody really has to be worried about losing existence. We supported our employees from the beginning also with PPEs.
Right. Daniel, I'll have to cut you there. Let me just bring in Doreen here and then move to Manish also. Doreen, I wanted to understand, how do you how do you view sustainability from a business perspective? What really goes into that? Just for our audience, if you can just from your
Okay, so the way that I view sustainability is, the long-term sustainable health of the company, the organization. And that depends on its relationship with the environment, its relationship with human capital, the interconnectivity of the supply chain, the health of the supply chain, the impact that the supply chain is having on society and on the environment. So these concepts of environment, social responsibility, governance, and the long-term health of the company are very, very interrelated. They can't be separated.
Absolutely. Let me just bring in Manish here. Manish, when we speak about all of this, the CFO plays obviously a big role in that. So how can take us through, how CFOs can play a lead role in the sustainability agenda as we go forward?
I guess Doreen said and Tarun said, sustainability is something that is not new. That is what has differentiated between organizations that had a short span versus those which have survived over decades, if not centuries. And the whole definition of sustainability has also changed. There was a time when enterprise meant return to shareholders and that's it. Very soon employees became part of that stakeholder that needs to be taken care of, and then came the suppliers, then came customers, and so slowly it expanded to a much broader ecosystem. In very literal sense, like Doreen mentioned, if you are not making sure that you are taking care of the whole environment, you are very likely not going to be a sustainable organization. We have seen examples of organizations which has invested in the locales in, wherever they have manufacturing units, they have worked towards development of the locals around the manufacturing unit. There is a focus on reducing carbon emission. How do you make sure that you take care of environment in general, the water pollution and stuff like that. So there has been various ways in which environment has been defined, but in a very narrow sense, if I will, and there are times when you kind of start making an assumption that profitability and sustainability are not necessarily hand in hand. I actually think the very other way around. In my mind, if you invest in making sure that you have created a complete sustainable ecosystem for yourself, the chances and the likelihood of you actually delivering a better return to your shareholders is much higher than what it will be if you were to try and be very contained in a very narrow definition of what you need to service. Happier employees means better productivity. Good customer satisfaction means better growth, better business. In fact, many a times word of mouth gets you more business. It's supposedly the best marketing tool than spending millions of dollars in advertising. Good supplier network means in distress, in difficult times, you will necessarily have support of your partners, and you will never be facing a situation where you are not getting your supplies. And it does not apply that much to a business like ours, which is mostly a services industry, people based. It's probably more for Daniel and the manufacturing businesses. But even in our business, when we are looking at recruiting people, right? What is our employer branding? How do potential employees look at our brand as an employer? Has an impact on how much of them are willing to join us, how many of them want to stay with us, how many of them want to recommend us. And all of this does play an important role in so-called sustainability and profitable growth of the enterprise. I'll give you a very simple example, right? We have always been thinking that there are a few ways of doing business which are essential. Pandemic has clearly shown that we can actually do with 5% of the travel that we used to do before. Sales used to believe that unless and until you go in front of the client and 20 people land into that meeting, the chances that you will win a business is very limited. We have conducted 15 months of business, and Mphasis has had 150% of its record deal wins over the largest that it had ever before. We have now, discussions with clients when we are actually going into their homes, even though it is virtual, where, the conversations become much more personal. People have more time, you are able to get more meetings, and you are doing it with less cost and more green. If at all there was a carbon footprint for IT services companies, it was the travel that employees used to do, and that has dropped by 70-80%, right? So I personally think that pandemic has really shown us, a lot of things that we don't probably need to do. It has clearly shown what is important, what really, adds value, and the fact that it is, more progressive, more sustainable, and it is obviously more profitable.
Right. So I think Tejaswini is back. So before I go to Tejaswini, I want to take the same question to Tarun, and get an understanding about how CFOs can play a lead role in the whole sustainability agenda for an organization. Tarun, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think most importantly, I think if we really look at CFOs as an architect of business value in any organization, I think they have a lot of onus and responsibility on their shoulders and make some very significant contribution in this area. I think one of the biggest challenge that I have seen working with many clients of mine is ability of the organization to integrate their sustainability reporting and show a direct or an indirect linkage with the financials. And I think that's definitely an area where a lot of CFO focus needs to go into and make sure that there is a good level of integration between all your sustainability strategies, all your implementation programs, and the measurement that you do around that, and how do you trace it back to your financial results, because I think that's what will generate the confidence of all the stakeholders. I'm not talking about shareholders, all the stakeholders, And I think that's definitely, I can't imagine any other function in an organization to be best positioned to do that, but the CFO.
Okay. Do you agree with that, Tejaswini?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me? This is Murphy's Law, right? You can put a dongle, you can have everything next to you, but I'm sorry for this mess. So, yes, I do agree with that. And more importantly, and coming to something which was just said a little earlier, that tech companies really should be at the forefront of this. And at IBM, we are really committed to environmental leadership in each part of our activity, because we are not necessarily just a people business, but even in products, in services, in our operations. And we do see that we can now leverage cloud, AI, IoT, data analytics to really get to the next level, to build actionable assets and build a very sustainable strategy around resources for us, like someone said, for the entire ecosystem, clients and partners. And we are very proud that we recently announced our commitment towards achieving zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. So this is a key milestone, a big step forward. And I do think that the pandemic has proven that we can do many, many things differently and smarter.
Okay, and I want to throw this question open to everybody, and please feel free to jump in and respond to this. From a risk analysis point of view, CFOs have always sort of looked at financials, but today with climate and environment and diseases becoming part of the entire risk analysis, how is that sort of changing? How you perform your own sort of role. Feel free. I mean, anybody who's got a point of view on that, please feel free to talk to us about it.
Probably this is one of those things, Manu, where CFOs can also play a very divergent role, right? You can either be risk averse, you can kind of try and identify risk and put processes in place to avoid them, or you can convert them into opportunities, right? And it's extremely hard to predict what will happen. Those days of creating a forecast, creating a plan are gone. When pandemic happened, I had actually just joined Mphasis, and it was only 1 week that I actually went to office. I have been literally working virtually over the last 16 months. So think about a situation where you are a CFO of a company of 30,000 people and you haven't met any one of them, and you have literally connected with all of them virtually, and still everything works, right? And there's nothing that has broken. So when I just came into this job, we did not make one plan. We created scenarios and we said, if this happens, then this is what we will do, and if this happens, then this is what we will do. And while making the plan, the focus was on how do we look at positive and not the negative. So we focused on being closer to the customer. We focused on how can we help our partners, our customers, because everyone is going through the same challenge. Instead of trying to see how do we survive, how do we cut cost, how do we manage our profitability. And I can assure you and I can tell you that the experience has been nothing less than extraordinary, because one, when you are with your employees, your customers, your stakeholders, when they need you the most, they remember that and they stay with you when things come back to normal. And more importantly, when you move from run the business to change the business, suddenly you are actually a partner to the customer and not a vendor to the customer. And in our services business, it's extremely important that the customer sees you that way. And Tejaswini talked about it, and so did Tarun. I think very clearly, it's a partnership approach wherein you are trying to make sure that customers, when they need you the most, the conversation is not about what are the challenges in you to deliver to their needs and what are the costs that it will take, but how do you make sure that their business is delivered in the best possible manner. And as you do that, it becomes a virtuous cycle of positivity, and before you are on the winning side of things. So for a CFO to think that way, for a CFO to move away from looking at only conservative measures, looking at only cost reduction, to an aggressive approach of investing for client satisfaction, for employee centricity, is what I have seen has got us to where we are. Means we as an IT services company, probably had one of the best growths, in the last year, and we probably have seen the least amount of attrition, and we have seen the most amount of referrals that we got from our clients.
Fascinating.
That's how I would put it, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Let me just bring in Tejaswini here. Tejaswini, do you think all of these factors, climate, environment, diseases, all of this, is that changing the way you perform your role now?
Yes, and I have something in common with Manish because I took this role last year and I've done this completely remotely. I took a repatriation flight on Air India from the US, and like you, I've done this entire journey of 1 year now, end of this quarter, totally remotely without meeting anyone, and we are really a big presence here. So can it be done? Yes, it can be done, as you said, Manish, but it is hard. And the next pivot I'd like to make is before this role, I looked after global cash collections, 80 billion for IBM. And that time, liquidity was not a problem as it is today, right? And the important thing is that how fast we were able to make the pivot to looking at industries instead of an enterprise. When I say we used to look at our enterprise and our liquidity, but now we started looking at it by industry, which were the most impacted industries, where were we essential, and to the point made by my panelists that really we are in the long haul with our clients. So how are we going to partner to make sure we all ride this pandemic together with better digitalization? The last point is empathy. I think CFOs in their roles, at least for me, it's true, we were not looking at such a HR centric approach, and empathy has started playing an incredibly important role, and it will continue to do so because we are only as strong as our people now. So really measures to ensure employee wellness, both physical and mental, will, I believe, be a game changer for the enterprise, and at least for IBM, we are really gone above and beyond.
Daniel, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you. And Manu, I promise you to cut it short so that you don't need to cut me short again. But I wanted to add a few more things on what has already been said. So I think the first question I'm always asking our risk controller is, has anyone ever had a pandemic like now with COVID-19 had on a risk radar? And usually the answer is nobody had looked at it. So I think the learning should be that we're not so much looking at our internal perspective, that we're taking a more holistic external view. Climate change will be on our risk radar screen. It will be also in future part of our business contingency planning. Supply chains I already mentioned are very much also impacted. Just look at another example. Who had thought a few weeks ago that a ship can block a Suez Channel for a couple of days? So a lot of things are now happening. I also learned since I'm in Mumbai that you have cyclones on this side of India, which also hasn't happened, I think, for decades, if ever before. And the last comment I wanted to add is when it comes to risk management, what we have learned, it's also very important to have this empathetic view, yes, and also to have a good grip on our workforce in the sense of, do we have a stability when it comes to a crisis? So we were suddenly confronted with a situation that in some departments, half of the people were down with COVID. Do you have a proper succession planning? Do you have a stronghold of people who step in when there's a crisis? And I think also from a sustainability perspective, it is important to have a highly motivated, skilled, and passionate staff around you to make sure also from a CFO perspective that you can rely on them. Even also ourselves can be down, and we need to make sure that the business continues. Nobody should be in the end irreplaceable. And we have learned that it is very important to pay much more attention also to the people well-being when it comes to such a crisis. I think that has paid off very well.
Right. Before I go to Tarun to sort of respond to my earlier question, on how all of this is sort of changing the way they perform their role. I want to ask our audience if there are any questions, please do send them now. We will be taking them towards the end of the session in about 10 minutes or so. So over to you, Tarun. Your thoughts on when we look at risk from a risk analysis point of view. factor in environment, climate, diseases, all of this. Is that really changing the way you perform your role?
Yeah, so I think Manu, two small points around that. I think great points from rest of the panelists. I think one thing is that it is now the mainstream agenda of businesses. So it's no longer about running your ESG strategic agenda through committees or through some satellite CSR function, which is very disconnected from the way you do your business. I think it has to be made mainstream. It has to be done by involving each and every individual in your organization, each and every customer or client of yours, as well as your suppliers. I think so. You have to carry along everybody. I think so. The second point is about when it becomes a way of life, you will see that. See, these are difficult topics. See, there is no out of the box. There's no standard solution available to straight away uplift your ESG practices overnight. I think you need to be very innovative. You need to be very, very creative to think through how you will reduce waste, how will you move towards renewable energy, how you will make net zero carbon footprint organization. Now, this obviously requires a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation. And invariably, when you invest in these, you will see that this capability that you're developing to innovate is also rubbing off on other aspects of your business. Same thing happens to your risk management practices. So as you focus more and more on how will your organization be resilient and how will you respond to various risks that may arise at you, you will realize that you are building a very, very strong capability to manage risk in your organization. And that also addresses a lot of other elements of risk, which are your business as usual risk or not related to environmental or social issues.
Absolutely.
I think that's what I wanted to add. Yeah.
Valid point. But at the center of all of this is of course, I mean, the people that work with you or for you. So in that sense, like we had upskilling, for the workforce for the digital revolution. What is actually the importance of bringing in the entire organization, even at the mid and low level employees, into the sustainability agenda and mandate? How critical is that? Doreen, your thoughts on that?
So, how we bring in employees at all levels and including, the lower levels. And I would say that in many cases, it's those employees, the youth, the younger people in the organization earlier in their careers that are really driving the urgency of sustainability. They get it. And the folks at the top need to also embrace this message.
Right.
The sustainability agenda must flow all the way through the organization. It cannot be successful unless it has the support of the board of directors, the C-suite, and management all through the ranks, but also that groundswell of sustainability support from the young people in the organization is really, really important to getting momentum, getting innovation, creativity, true emotional commitment to the cause. And that, I think, is what makes it successful.
Interesting. Tejaswini, would you like to respond to that? I mean, in terms of getting your entire workforce aligned with what you want to do in terms of your agenda?
I think I would go one step back and perhaps to what is Doreen's professional as well. I think we really need to step back and look at our education as well. I think this is a topic which has not been addressed, nor has the skills of the future been addressed. So one of the things we need to do and which we are driving through PTech is that we grow the next gen or the future, even after the millennials, to be ready for sustainable growth and for sustainable organizations. And the second thing, and I feel very strongly about this, is that we really need to relook at our job roles and really groom the next generation to be willing to do roles which which are not there today. There will be new roles. They will have to be very data savvy, which I think at least my kids are rather data savvy, I must say, with all tools, and become data evangelists for the future, because that is going to be the foundation of the future sustainability and agenda for enterprises, and also for survival of this new generation of leaders. If they are not really experts in that field, a lot of the work that I did in my career as stepping stones has vanished. People, I really believe you have to develop a T-shaped. You have to develop expertise in something and be passionate about it. We are, I think, past the era of just having managers, if I may say so.
Okay. We spoke about a lot of the opportunities that sort of await us, and that is in front of us. But I wanted to get an understanding about what are some of the key challenges at an organizational level that really needs to be leveled out, and even from a regulatory challenge point of view, are there really concerns? How do you address them? On that front. So maybe we can get Manish to respond to that and get others as well.
Like I said earlier, Manu, I think regulators also have responded to this whole pandemic so nicely. At least I can talk about the industry that I work in.
Right.
The regime that was there about the SEZ and the regime of DOT allowing termination of PSTN lease lines into into the international lease line networks, and that had its limitations in terms of employees working from home. Pandemic hit, and suddenly there was no option for employees to come to office, and if you were still bound by those regulations, you would have no option but to not work. And the regulators responded very well. We had relaxations to begin with for a short duration, and then the extensions happened, and eventually now we are in a situation where there are no restrictions on employees to work from home despite the SEZ or the DOT requirements, right? The same thing happened in our customer organizations as well. I am pretty sure most of the large banks globally would have, I'm just giving an example, most of the large global banks would have in their roadmap some time to have a virtual ability to deliver to their customers. Pandemic hit, and suddenly there was no way for them to be in the physical spaces, and there was no alternative for them to but go virtual. And there were several requirements which earlier regulations mandated, which were relaxed, changed, altered to take care of the new normal, wherein the customer service became the most important thing. And we as partners using technology were able to enable those banks to go virtual on a almost overnight basis. I think our general assumption, and I'm maybe going out on a limb on this, our general assumption that regulators are slow to respond, that regulators, because they don't respond, will create challenges for our business, is a little unfounded. And my experience in the last 15-18 months have been, whether it is the example of the SEZ and the DOT, or it is the way tax department started behaving, the way you started getting approvals, has been a very, very pleasant surprise. And just not in India, but on a global basis. Means we had regulators proactively reach out saying, if your business has had an impact, we are willing to dole out concessions, we are willing to allow postponement of payments. I think regulators do play an important role if we understand what are they doing to make sure that it's an environment that is safe for everybody to operate in. And when situation demands, they are as proactive and as responsive as anybody else. And if we can partner with them, I'm pretty sure that the whole mood and the whole belief about the regulatory system, would undergo a significant change if it has not already gone through a significant change.
Certainly. Daniel, I'm throwing the same question to you. Manish spoke about from a regulator point of view. From an organizational point of view, what are some of the key challenges that really needs to be leveled out if we have to go on this path of sustainable development?
Yeah, good question. And I also spent a lot of time thinking about that, what needs to happen on an organizational level. First of all, I think the whole organization needs to drive towards common goals. And we talked a lot about ESG, and it's a huge transformation also to go towards digitalization, externally as well as internally. And the whole organization needs to stand behind this. And it should not be seen as a threat. I think if one thing the pandemic has taught us very well is to embrace, to welcome, to implement also digital solutions. And that has come a long way. But that also with the pandemic led to a very, very fast change also in the mind of the people. So from an organizational level, I think there needs to be freedom to act, entrepreneurship. is very important. If we talk about crisis response, then it is about people responding to that crisis. It cannot be done primarily top down. It is something that relates to the entire organization, every factory, every manufacturing, every piece in the supply chain, every corporate function has to help to keep the business running. And from a regulatory point, just to add one more comment, I agree with Manish. It has been done quite well. We were also able to do, for instance, a virtual annual general meeting, which helped us a lot. So we also have to fulfill our governance pieces, and that the regulators have reacted quite well. If I would be able to voice out one request or one wish, I still get a lot of stamp paper for power of attorneys delivered to my home. If that could be also digitalized, if the regulators could do something over there, that would be very helpful for us. Other than this, there's not much to complain. I think the regulators have responded quite well, also now allowing us to drive vaccination programs for our employees and their families. I think that it was also a very good step forward. So overall, there's, from my side, not much to complain.
Great. I'm just going to take another question to Tarun, and before that, if there are any questions from the audience, kindly please drop in. We've got some. We would, it would be great to have some more questions with us. Tarun, what I wanted to understand is that when you think about what has happened with COVID-19 and understanding all of that. What becomes clear is that the cost of prevention obviously is likely to be much better than the cost of their various impact. Is that right? And is there something that the CFO can do towards that?
Yeah, I think I know it's a issue which we have been grappling, at least in the CFO community. Cost of having good ESG practices versus ROI, etc. So I guess I think my personal belief is that debate is now well settled, that when you invest in ESG practices, you are preparing for a marathon and not for sprints. And I think in the long run, if you have to really look at your total cost of ownership for running a smart and a successful business, you will realize that whatever investments you're making in strengthening your ESG practices, they're very minuscule. I think the returns are far, far superior. And I think even if you look at some of the performance of companies which rate very high on ESG, I think it has shown. So I think that debate is more or less settled. I don't think CFOs today should be worried about that, whether it's not a choice of either or. I think you can be profitable, you can run a very financially prudent business, and at the same time be very ESG mature and responsible. I think what's really helping is, I think the regulators, I think you were talking about regulators. I think regulators are also waking up to this, and I think they are also focusing a lot on standardized reporting so that businesses can be compared. I remember SEBI came out with that business responsibility and sustainability reporting consultation paper last year, and I think in September 2020 they announced that they expect top 1,000 companies by market capital in India to be following their reporting framework for the current financial year, and from next year they will make it mandatory. Similarly, I think there are many other global organizations who have been focusing on developing a good reporting framework. I know World Economic Forum has been doing a lot of pioneering work in this. I recently read that even IFRS has set up a standards board, and they will come up with some IFRS standard on ESG related reporting, so that I think the confusion in the minds of people is not there, how to measure, what to report, and how to compare, and how to link this ESG reporting with the financial reporting. I think there is a lot of momentum that's building up in this space, and very soon, at least I'm very hopeful that there will be some good standards and good reporting frameworks that will come into place. And I think that's definitely going to ease life of a lot of CFOs who are still skeptical about it, and still confused how to go about reporting. And see, it's also a lot about communication, because it's also about the social impact you're going to create. So you have to communicate a lot with your stakeholders, with your society, with your communities, and all that becomes very, very important to have a consistent common reporting framework across all businesses, across all organizations, so that even the ecosystem is also clear about what are they hearing about from businesses.
Right. So we'll start taking the questions from audience now. We've got our first question from Fatima. We can see that different blockchain networks are working on supply chain traceability and sustainability. Will blockchain play a critical role in improving global corporate sustainability? Tejaswini, you want to answer that, and I'll ask somebody else as well.
I'd love to answer that because I think blockchain is the future. I have no doubt that blockchain will absolutely be a critical factor in global corporate sustainability. And the simple reason for that is that it gives you total transparency. So IBM has done something with in the food safety. We had cases where you had to dump entire crops because you didn't know which came with the bacteria which was harming people in one case. But blockchain can really narrow it down and give you entire food safety on where what is going wrong. Let's take another example. I think that it has tremendous potential in the financial sector as well, in all our banking transactions, in giving us total transparency of what is happening in the FSS sector end to end, in the telco sector end to end. And there is cutting edge technology which will enable us to do this in each of these. I think to Daniel's point, even on the regulatory and tax aspect, I think we will see a world in our lifetime where we will see total end-to-end automated tax filing, automation, no signing of stamp papers, because it will no longer be required. We have reached a pivotal point where we are ready to embrace blockchain from an ethics perspective, from a technology perspective, and from a mindset perspective.
Absolutely. Doreen, would you like to come in and respond to the same question on whether blockchain will play a critical role in improving global corporate sustainability?
Yes, I agree that blockchain is the future, and I really like the emphasis on safety, the provenance of certain materials as they flow through the supply chain. Food safety, the example was an excellent one, and the control over the transactions. Those are contract management, extremely important to efficiency and effectiveness, and making sure that we are meeting our goals.
Absolutely. We have a second question, which is that, does the world need a global sustainability rating system? And what is the likelihood of that happening? Tarun, Manish, Daniel, any of you want to sort of respond to that?
Yeah, I can actually go first, and maybe adding to what Tejaswini and Doreen mentioned. If you were to, there is an interesting report by the Google engineers who talked about the pace of transformation, and if you see what took millions of years now is happening in a year, right? And there are various examples of that, and all that has done is it has made the world much smaller than maybe even a small village about 200, 300 years back, with the challenge that it is difficult to know all the hands that has touched a product that is reaching to you, which was very easily traceable when you were 200 years back in a small village, because you knew exactly who did what to get that product to you. When you think about that, and when you keep in mind that the pace of change going forward is going to be even more, means now what will happen in a year probably took thousands of years before. It's extremely important that technologies like blockchain enable us to reward those who are doing it in the right way versus those who are not. And whether you call it one reporting rating at a global level, or whether you try to bring all of them on the same plane, ability to compare one versus the other so that you know which one to take and which one not to take, especially keeping in mind what you think is more sustainable, is certainly going to be very, very important. Means we couldn't have imagined free trade and such a large economic transaction across countries unless you had a base currency, if you will, right? There are various theories about what that will be going forward, but I'm not getting into that as of now. But
right.
assuming you wanted to make sure that there was a way to compare everything in the world on one base, and that helps everybody to make the right choice, obviously assuming that the methodology for calculating that is correct. I think it is very, very important to have that one base, whether you call it one rating globally or whether you call it something else. I think that will be really helpful.
Okay, Tarun, would you want to respond to the same question?
Yeah, sure. I think, Manu, I think there is a lot that needs to happen in this space. And as I mentioned, that there are multiple global organizations, forums, standard bodies which are working on that. But I think, and I think referring to the question, like, how does it impact? I think one thing is very clear. Your ESG scoring or parameters are lead indicators. And
Right.
and I think we have seen that, like Accenture actually tracks around 7,000 companies on an index. What we have developed in house called Competitive Agility Index. Now, it's a combination of your growth, your profitability, and what we call as sustainability and trust measures. And invariably, we have seen that moment an organization, and this obviously index is developed based on a lot of machine learning, artificial intelligence, using financial data, a lot of qualitative data around sustainability reporting that these organizations are doing. And we have seen that a 1 or 2% drop in your competitive agility index, and across sectors we have seen it's your EBITDA performance could get impaired by anything between 5 to 15%, depending on which sector you are. Similarly, I think the corollary of that is also true. If you are able to up your performance on some
Right.
of these ESG ratings or competitive agility index by 1 or 2 points, you can be rest assured that your business performance is going to improve in next few quarters. So there's a very, very strong correlation between your ESG scoring and financial performance. And I think that's what investors are looking at. That's what various stakeholders are looking at.
That's a follow-up actually question from our audience as well, which is that does ESG scoring make any difference to Indian companies? And has COVID-19 had any impact on incorporating these scores into a company's financial data and brand reputation? The question is open, so who would like to go, please take the question.
I can go
We'll
first.
see 1,000 companies reporting this year, and
Okay.
we will be able to see a correlation between their financial performance versus what they are reporting as per SEBI framework. So it will be for all of us to be, it will be available to us, I guess, very soon, and we should be able to see these results.
Okay. Manish, your thoughts?
Being an Indian listed company, and there is typically this assumption made that there is any different standard of measurement for an Indian company versus a foreign company. And I have been in companies which are listed in the US. I have been companies which are owned and registered outside of India. I think as the global platform shrinks, there are no differences. Our market for investors, where we raise money from, are no different, and the rules and regulations are, for a well-governed company, are similar, if not maybe stricter as it relates to countries like us, because we come with that additional baggage of coming from a country which is perceived as not, that well run. So I think that is one part. But keeping that aside, clearly over the last few years, and I have been in the business for 25 years, I have been managing a public company, for maybe few decades. Clearly that focus on analysts to ask questions. There are analysts which are now ESG analysts, so to speak. There are funds which has ESG as a key criteria for investing in portfolio companies. Our company has a primary investor, which is private equity, and they give a lot of emphasis and focus on ESG. And clearly this has gained a lot more momentum than it was before. Like I guess the panelists talked about earlier, this was always an important part of the agenda for the well-run companies. It is now also getting more prominence and more mind share, so to speak, in the investor, the analyst communities, who are eventually favoring those who have better ESG practices than those who don't. And last but not the least, irrespective of what the analysts and the investors ask, irrespective of what the regulatory requirements are, I personally think, and our company believes that, like they say, green is profitable, right? Similarly, I think good ESG practices will help you create better enterprise value. And if we are in the business of building enterprise value, then I don't think regulators or in the environment should have to do anything to force us to do it. It means we are doing it ourselves. So I clearly see, an increased momentum. I clearly see this to be the right thing to do, and this is a larger share of voice in our conversations as we, interact with people nowadays.
Absolutely. I think on that note, we'll take closing comments. I think we are well past our time, so I think we'll take closing comments from all of you and wrap up the session. So maybe your closing thoughts on whether we are at a point where environmental concerns and corporate bottom lines are. Do you reckon that they're actually aligned much better now than ever before?
Absolutely. I think the verdict is out already, right? Based on the discussion we had, that it is going to become an imperative for the future, and I'm very confident about that.
Okay, understood. Doreen, your closing thoughts?
So I agree. This is the topic of the future, and I encourage CFOs and CFO teams to really step up and be leaders in this environment. The finance team brings those skills to the plate. Precision, better information in disclosures. We can add rigor and relevancy and credibility to support confidence that leads to better decision making. So all of the finance people who are listening to this call, I encourage you to get involved in your company's ESG, CSR, all of these acronyms, the social responsibility and sustainability of your organization.
Right. Daniel, your final thoughts. I think you also wanted to make a few points in the earlier question as well. So.
No, fine. I mean, everything was addressed. I wanted just to make the point that I would welcome also a global system, especially when it comes to transparency, a global system on scoring of sustainability. It's very high on our charter in our company. That is for sure. Environment needs to be protected. I think that's also a fact. Everyone agrees to that. And then we drive sustainability not only because our analysts or shareholders want it, but primarily because we believe in it and because we also see opportunities arising out of that. So I would also embrace everyone who is in charge of a business to take it very positively, to say climate change has to be tackled, but on the other hand also opens up business opportunities when it comes to more energy efficiency, etc. So there's a lot happening out there. And if I would put myself into the shoes of an investor or an analyst, then I would very much like to see a company being very serious about sustainability. I would put my money only into a company which is acting long-term and which is also providing some business to society.
Right. Manish, Tarun, your closing thoughts maybe on, what a CFO can do to sort of drive the sustainability agenda?
I guess probably I'll close on a little philosophical thought. I think running responsible businesses, running sustainable businesses is a responsibility and a debt that we have to pay back for our children and for future generations. And I think CFOs must take lead in driving this. I think that's what I would want to end with.
Right. Manish?
I agree with Tarun's philosophical point, but on a more materialistic plane, I think starting with themselves, if the CFOs could have a change in their own thinking, that instead of looking at short term and maximizing the return here and now, thinking long term and creating sustainable practices, which might seem an investment without a return, will probably augur well for the company itself, because at least when we look at historical data and we know looking at rear view mirror we can't be driving the car, but there is enough and more to prove that organizations who have looked at sustainability as a investment and not as an expense have actually delivered a much better outcome for its stakeholders, and I'm making sure that stakeholders is used in the appropriate manner in the larger sense than when companies have taken a narrow view. So absolutely, important for this to start with the CFOs who control the postings, and if they are not supportive of it, many a times organizational intent itself start getting withered out.
Absolutely. I think, on that note, we're really well past our time. So it's been a rather riveting conversation. And I must admit that, we could have gone on for a little longer. But thank you so much, Tarun, Tejaswini, Manish, Daniel, Doreen, all of you for taking time out to be with us today evening. From all of us at Forbes India, we hope that you continue to stay safe and sound. Thank you. Thank you so much once again.